should we get on to singing? And should we?
Sure, man. Let's
should
do
we
it.
talk about the singing? I sent you an email with a bunch of bits and bobs in, and I got a list of topics going, so we can go through and just talk about things, man. I wanted to ask you first about your starting point as a singer and what singing was like for you when you started. My impression from previous conversations we've had before is that we kind of started in similar spots, as in, we both had some struggles. So do you want to go ahead and let us know about some of that?
Yeah, sure. Basically, I started. I'm pretty much self-taught, and when I started, I was, I guess you'd say, pretty close to tone deaf, in that I don't mean like medically tone deaf. I just mean tone deaf as in I couldn't match any pitches at all. So like you'd give me a note or something like this, and I go, and this was actually my lifesaver. I read a book by Jamie Vendera, where he recommended using a tuner, and I would sit in the closet because I had nowhere else to practice at the time. I would sit in the closet. That was the only place that was like soundproofed, right? I'll sit in the closet and I'll just match pitches for an hour a day. That's it. So I'd just go, and just watch the needle go in the green. And at first it was like, and I have to slide it up, and but within a month it improved my ear quite a lot. But the ear was a big struggle for me. So I started that way.
Could I just
what else?
Could I just
jump in?
interject? I wanted to ask you about that. Would you say that the pitch problem in particular was that you couldn't physically coordinate to match the pitch, or that you struggled to actually hear the difference between pitches?
It was a hearing thing. Because it was a hearing thing. And for sure.
How old were you at this point, out of interest?
Oh, I was like 20. Oh no,
okay.
it was probably earlier than that. Probably 18, something like that. Yeah.
Sweet, man. Yeah, we probably. I mean, I was playing guitar in my teens, but in terms of singing, we started roughly at the same time. I mean, I was a bit later, about 22, I think, when I started doing this seriously. So one thing I've noticed is learning this stuff as an adult does present certain challenges that you don't necessarily face as much of when you're younger learning this stuff. But carry on anyway.
Yeah, I agree absolutely. Another thing too, I mean, I really kind of started when I was about 15, because when I was 15, I had a friend who could sing, and, by my standards now, it probably wouldn't be, amazing. But at the time, I was like, oh, wow, you can sing pretty good. And I said, how? And he said, oh, you just practice. And I said, what? I didn't know you can practice and actually get better. So I thought it was just something you're born with. And so, I just started practicing. I mean, I had no idea what I was doing, and I wasn't getting any better, but I was practicing. And that that started my discipline towards learning singing. And when I was about 18, that's when I started to actually look at, techniques and teachers and stuff like that to actually develop it further.
Sweet, man. And yeah. So following from that, did you have any aha kind of moment with your singing, or just with your learning in general, where you started to realise, I can get good at this? Like, when did you have your first breakthrough in terms of feeling like you were actually improving? Like you said, you started at 15, but for a long time you weren't actually getting anywhere. Like, when was the first time you noticed you were actually getting better? And
probably when I was like 21, so like years later, probably like 21 to 23, like around that area. But we were talking about my struggles. I forgot to mention, outside of pitch, my main struggle was that F4, F sharp 4. I mean, I just physically could not get past that area. I would shout up in my chest voice, hit a wall, flip to falsetto. And at the time I was writing songs, so I had all these songs, I had the melodies all fleshed out, and my melodies of course, required notes that were like A4s and stuff like that. And I was like, please God, can I just hit the A4? That's all I need. I don't care about anything. Just pitch and A4. That's it. Nothing else. I don't give a damn. I don't care. I just want that. Please grant me that wish. It like as if bargaining like that was going to make it come easier. But those were my main struggles. Now, in terms of my breakthrough, I would say it was around, I don't know, maybe 21 to 20. It's kind of like a gradient. You kind of just start to get things working. But I would say the biggest breakthrough for me was, it was after a period where I had been going on forums and going on the internet and trying to get advice, and nothing was working for me. People were giving me just all sorts of contradictory kind of things from different perspectives, and I was in a rut, and I just stopped looking and just practiced. So I had all of this material, like courses, stuff that I learned off teachers and stuff. And I decided I'm just going to ban myself off the internet, just not going to look at anything. I'm just going to sit down and just work with what I got here. And that's when things started to make sense for me. But probably the biggest breakthrough was when I stopped trying to, because I went through a period where I was trying to grow a full mix voice from falsetto, because people told me that's how you do it. So I would be in just like a and they'd say you can grow that into your full voice, mixed voice. For me, I couldn't do that, and I tried for like a year and a half to do that, and I just couldn't get anywhere with it. And I just kind of just said, enough of that. I'll just work with my chest voice, and then just use the stuff I learned about vowel modifications and support, and just see what happens. Mm-hmm. And I would say the biggest breakthrough was when I started doing very long sessions. So I didn't have time to practice an hour a day like what most people recommend. I could only do about 15 minutes, and then on the weekend I had a whole day. So what I would do is I'll train 15 minutes a day. Then on the weekend I'll do a 7-hour session. In that 7-hour session, I had a breakthrough where I found this release where I was still in full voice, still connected, but it was easy, and I could go to the high notes. And it was like around the 4th or 5th hour in the day, and I was just like, what the hell is this? I was recording a song, and I said, what the hell? I'm hitting A's and stuff. I'm hitting B4s and stuff like this, and I can just kind of go up into the range of my falsetto, but it's not falsetto. And it's connected. And I started to use that, just long warm-up times, as my method to get into it. And over time, I learned how to get into the sensation without having to spend hours and hours and hours to get into it. So I'd say that was the big breakthrough.
Yeah, I talk to students quite a lot about, a lot of the time you can get a student there, or you can get there yourself as a singer, but it can take you hours, or it can take you a long time, and a lot of the process of learning all this stuff is just condensing that discovery each day down to a few minutes rather than a few hours, and that takes experience and time. Also, I wanted to just nip back to one thing you mentioned, because I do think it's an interesting thing you talking about, going from light and right to full voice and how it didn't work for you. And I actually generally will concede, based on what you said, that approach, in terms of, I think what I found in my teaching has been that people who are at the start of their journey, and I think about myself at the start of my own journey, is that the ability to coordinate the muscles you need to in here is so lacking in terms of the refinement, that to move from something light into something a little bit more pressure is actually pretty unrealistic. You're asking somebody with no skill to make very subtle, precise movements. Really, a lot of the time when somebody's lacking in that skill, the best thing you can do is just give them a very obvious thing to hold on to. And I think partly that's what you're alluding to there, and I think it is a fair assessment, because I could not, the types of coordinations I demonstrate now to people, like I just couldn't have done, even if somebody who had shown me when I started. I had that, and I remember having coaches where they gave me something really concrete, full and thick, and all of a sudden my mind was like, whoa, like it felt like my mind was being blown, because I've had this thing to grab onto that I never even knew existed. And that's the thing, if you're asking somebody to hold on something very subtly that they don't even know exists, which is really what the real true hard case is, the the quandary they're in is that they actually have never squeezed on the muscles they need to squeeze on in order to get up there easily. So I just wanted to cover that a little bit, because I know a lot of the time there's this kind of debate between, you know, what's right. Is it strong and then learning to back off? Is it light and right, learning to put weight on? And I think it's very nuanced, this type of discussion, and it's not necessarily always a case of, you know, one side's right, the other side's wrong, because people pick up on this and they kind of get this sense of this coach is in this camp and this coach is in this camp, and I sometimes think, well, hang on, like, it's not always, you know, it's not always as simple as that. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely, and I would say it's not about light and right or strong and wrong or whatever. I would say it's just about right and right. So you just get it right, and wherever that's easiest to find for somebody, then that's where it is. So some people, they find it backing off the voice. Some people, they find it leaning into the voice more. It just depends, and it depends where they're in their range. It depends on a lot of things. So it's a gradient, yeah. So I would be very. I don't like to be very black and white on anything. It's a gradient for sure.
Yeah, it's interesting as well. As I've improved with my own stuff and things, I've started to realise, you know, I look back on coaches that I used to vehemently disagree with, and now I think I actually, based on certain variables, they're going to be right. And the problem is with a lot of this is that the answer always depends on the context. You know, it depends on, like you say, it depends on the singer. Some people will have just natural full mix relatively easily, and that they can't back off of it. Others will have just they'll have light sounds quite easily, but as soon as they try and lean in it, they get scared. And so it's like, and you know, it always depends. At least that's the way I see it nowadays, more so than I used to, when I kind of used to feel more, you know, it's this way. Anyway, let's move on from that. I wanted to ask you. You mentioned Jamie Vendera, and he's somebody who I've never worked with, but I have seen quite a few of his videos. And I'm actually quite a big fan of some of his teaching. The way he demonstrates is very impressive to me, and he's into singers that I like Jeff Buckley. He appreciates some of the subtleties going on. And did you ever work with him directly? And also, just I wanted to ask you, like, you said you worked most of this on your own. Have you ever worked specifically with any coaches, you know, for any period of time, this type of thing?
I have, but most of the stuff I learned was through the courses. So I took with Jamie's course. I took with, like all of them, I took with Ken's course. I took with Kevin Richards' course. I took with Brett Manning's, both his courses, Mastering Mix, Singing Success. I took with, Seth Riggs' Singing for the Stars, Jim Gillette's, I forgot what that one's called, the Vocal Power or something like that. James Lugo's one. I would say the most helpful ones for me were Jamie Vendera's, James Lugo's, Ken Tamplin's, and Seth Riggs' courses. Those ones really, really helped me in different periods that I was in. So I started with Jamie Vendera's stuff, and that got me to a certain point. Ken's stuff helped me because it was more about vowel modifications, which really started to help me not hit a wall. James Lugo's stuff was good because it's kind of like a bit of SLS, but it's also kind of a bit of stuff with vowel modifications and just, you know, it's kind of like a bridge between them all. And it's he just has you going into a you know, you just get into a routine, you just do it and just copy his voice, and it started to fall into place for me. Seth Riggs' course really helped me quite a lot, learning how to get things feeling easier. So what I like about Seth's course in particular is that it's laid out in certain phases, and when I made my program, I've made it kind of like that as well, where there's certain phases for different issues. So for example, somebody splatting has a completely different issue than somebody who's really muffled and overly dark when they sing, and so they're both straining on a certain note, but they're straining for different reasons. and they've got to learn how to do something different to fix both of those issues. So Seth Riggs's course is kind of set up in that way as well, where he'll have you do like kind of he might have you do something brighter or something kind of more hoodier, something that latches on to a thicker coordination, some things that thin it out a bit more, all sorts of things like that. So that helped me quite a bit. And I would say probably the guy that's helped me the most, though, as of now, is my friend Marnell Sample. He's a good vocal coach. He's a friend of mine. You can reach him at vocalliberation.com. And I talk with him all the time on a daily basis, and we're always bouncing stuff off each other, and he's always sharing insights that I find very useful. So I would say he's the one that I'm learning the most off of right now, where I'm at now. He's got a good ear. I think that's the most important thing of a teacher, is that they have to have a good ear, because sometimes I get emails from people and they say, oh, what should I do? Should I do SLS, or should I do this, or should I do that, or should I do this technique? And I said, it's limited by the coach's ear. You see, take with SLS, you've got like the certification system where you've got a teacher and then they certify teachers underneath them. They may have all the exact techniques and the theory and the methods, but if they don't have the same ear as the guy that taught them that stuff, they won't know when to apply the stuff that they were taught. They won't hear the problem, and then they won't give them they'll just run someone up the scale, and they won't hear where they go, oh, you actually need this. Okay, you need that.
And I tell you, it's really, that is hard to learn. I think learning what you should be doing and stuff for yourself is hard enough, but hearing what people hearing like, say for example, you get a student and they're doing maybe one, two, or three different things wrong, and you hear them go up the scale. And as a coach, you've got to hear the different things. Then you've got to be able to separate them out into individual problems, and then you've got to help the student work at them one at a time. That is hard, and you can pass that on to people to learn, but ultimately they're going to have to sit there and teach people, and that's the real, like, where the rubber meets the road. Like, hours teaching, hours trying to solve problems for people. And in my own experience, when I started teaching, the first 4 years really were relatively in the dark, and then probably the last 12 months I started to piece things together, and now it's working a lot better for me. But
that's great.
Learning those,
it's always a learning process, though, isn't it? You're always discovering, like you're always learning new things.
And I find myself, I get, you go through ups and downs with it, but I think what you say is very, very true, and I found even within specific, you say you get an SLS, the, what do they call them, the certification levels and things like that. I've had some who are, I've experienced some who are high levels, very high level, and I feel like they're missing something, and then I've met some who are relatively recently certified, and they understand things very well. It's not necessarily the best guide.
It was like with Jesse Nemitz, for example. That guy, he kind of he was very intuitive, and they grabbed onto him really fast, and you know what I mean, because they could tell that he got it. You know what I mean? He got it really. He just got it, and he understood it. And they were like, oh, okay, you're good. We'll certify you and stuff.
There's
so I don't know.
Yeah, well, there's things. The interesting about, there's things that he used to talk about that in the last year I've really started to understand more in terms of from a coaching perspective, and I wondered, like, how did this dude figure that out so quickly? Because it's taken me a lot longer. Partly it's because I've had to figure out on my own. He had Brett Manning there every day to guide him, so that makes obviously a significant difference. But I do think that some people are a little bit more intuitive with being able to hear these types of things, and because you can hear, everyone can hear a problem with a singer. It's very easy. But if you ask somebody, what is that problem and how are you going to fix it? Now that is a tough thing. But just going back as well, I liked what you said about the Seth Riggs stuff, that you were saying that really helped you make singing easier. And I think really, a lot of the time, the journey for singers is first they got to learn the technique, and then they got to learn how to make it as easy as possible, because the natural singers that everybody loves, the thing that they have is that it's very, generally speaking, very easy for them. They've got this kind of, it just feels like it's pouring out of them. You don't get a sense of work, even though they are working to do that. Obviously, as you talk about, and I quite like when you do. There's a feeling of this. It's effortless in the sense that it's super efficient what they do, generally speaking. And I always try and promote a lot of those ideas with my coaching, because I feel like that stuff really does help separate somebody from the learning singers, that I was and that everyone comes across, and I still am, but I want to get towards more of that just easy flow and that calmness that great singers do have.
It should be easy.
Yeah,
it should be easy.
But it's funny because we say it should be easy, but then we're talking about easy in a little bit of a different sense, aren't we? Because I know you talk about in your videos some, and is this idea of it does require effort, and a lot of learning singers, they're not willing to put in the required amount of physical work to get into their mix a lot of the time, or get into the higher part of their range with a full sound. Do you know what I mean? As in, so it's a different kind of easy.
Bodily effort too.
Yeah.
I also.
Yeah. I'm talking about. I'm talking about it being as efficient as possible, I guess, when we talk about being easy in that sense. But then in the sense we were talking about before. But in this sense, it's not easy in the sense of it's just effortless. It requires physical work to do, especially when you're talking about singing on louder sounds and things like that.
Because and it's tough to talk about this because everybody. Everybody has their barometer of what they think effortless or easy means. So this is something I would really talk more about specifically to each person individually, because sometimes I'll have students where any kind of effort they perceive as pushing.
Yeah.
Any kind of effort. So to them, I'll hear it and I go, that's great. How'd it feel? And they'll be like, oh, it feels like I'm just pushing and shouting. And it's like, well, it is loud, but it's not shouting. It's different to shouting. And then other people, they will be shouting and straining and pushing, and they don't even know they're doing that. They think it's fine, and you're like, no, you're going way too far with this. So that's not right. So there's a lot of things in singing. It kind of comes back to that grayscale, the gradient idea, where everybody, and we can talk about vocal terms and terminology and stuff, but I would say that I change my terminology based on who I'm talking to, because I just try to talk in a way where we reach an understanding, rather than saying some terms and then they don't know what it means. So I use my students' terms often. They will say, oh, this is my head voice or whatever. So I'll just go, okay, head voice, and I'll just talk that to them. But that's not my term, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So,
and I did actually put this on the list in terms of how much effort should it take to sing. And in case we're covering that now. And but you're totally right. It's a relative term. It's a relative term, and I've experienced this when I remember going to a coach, and she got me singing more fully, and in my mind it was taking so much effort, and I was almost confused. I was like, but they told me it should be this free, easy thing to do, and the confusion in your mind, because it feels weird, because you're getting information here and then your reality is like not that at all, and then conversely you get the opposite, like you were saying, and I think when people talk about this sensation of, well, it feels like I'm pushing or yelling or shouting, well, a full voice kind of is really, in my mind, a controlled yell. It's a yell that doesn't hurt you. It's a yell that's healthy and balanced, and it doesn't. But it's still a yell in a sense. Yeah, it's still a yell in the sense that it's aggressive and it's loud, just like if you were shouting somebody across the street. It's not something that's, it doesn't come out just by, it doesn't come out that way. It's got to be, it's got to be aggressive and just going in there real quick. let's just snip back on these topics. I wanted to go through. Right, what is this? Yeah,
because there's a lot of good stuff on this topic.
Yeah. So let's go to this idea of let's just start here. Chest voice or mixed voice, and talk about basically terminology, why it confuses singers. You kind of just touched on that briefly.
Hang on. Sorry to interrupt. Can we, just one thing about that whole thing about effortlessness thing and all that stuff before we move on. Here's something that I like to say to people, because I train a lot of singers that have to perform live a lot, like gigging singers, like singers that perform on wedding singers, or singers that perform on cruise ships and all that kind of stuff. And oftentimes they're singing stuff like Bruno Mars, Journey, Bon Jovi, just high stuff, stuff that's tough. And they will sing something to me, like I'll say like, show me what you're struggling with or whatever, and they'll sing a line, and it sounds good, and in that line they can do it, but I know that the way they're approaching it doesn't have the efficiency, like you were talking about efficiency. I can hear that there's stuff that will stop them from singing the whole song in one take and feel good after that, right? Rather than it's just like coming through that song and then it gets flatter and flatter, and then you can't sing that last chorus, and then you're screwed, and then you can't do the next song. See, to me, when I think about easy, I think of, it's not that it won't take effort from your body, but it's that you can go from the start of the song to the finish, and you can sing all the other songs after that, and afterwards you still feel good, and you're not killing yourself to sing these songs. You have the stamina, you have the consistency, and you have the ease. The high notes you're not scared of, because you can go up to them. They don't take it doesn't take like that to go up to the notes and stuff. So to me, a big part of it is about singing it in one take live, because that's what they need to do. So I have to show them things that achieve that. So that's kind of where I come from when I talk about singing should be easy, because if they sing a line to me and I can see it's hard for them, it's like, well, you ain't going to get through the whole song if that feels hard for you. You know what I mean?
Yeah, so, on the whole set. And that often comes with, they've got the right technique working, but they have other stuff coming in to interfere, and it makes the higher notes hard. And a lot of the time that's just a case of they've got to sing more efficiently in their higher range. They've got to just keep everything as relaxed as possible whilst staying in the coordination you're in. That takes some time and work to work through, but those types of problems are usually easier to fix, in the sense of they're already doing a lot of the right things. They've just got to make it a higher quality in terms of the coordination, but versus kind of newbies who are really struggling, who they're not even doing something right. It's like you're starting from ABC, and that's it's
and the perception too. Their perceptions, like with a already established singer, they usually have a good perception of what it should sound like. But with a very brand new singer, you have to almost teach them, well, it's meant to sound like this. This is the sound that it will sound like when it doesn't have those tensions. So you almost have to shape their kind of perceptions of what their voice is going to sound like. Because some of them, they listen to singers that have tensions, and they use that as a template. And so they go for the sound, and they think, oh, isn't it supposed to sound like this? And it's like, no, that's the tension that's kicking in there. So you're absolutely right. Yeah, when they start from scratch, it's a bigger hand-holding process for sure, man.
Let's go on to this idea of terminology.
Yeah.
And what no, it's fine. I was going to kind of go back to the effort thing anyway, but I'm glad you've covered it when you did. It makes more sense to the listeners. So
cool.
Yeah, let's talk about basically these terms: chest voice, mixed voice, belt. Why they confuse learning singers. I know that I like some of the stuff that you talk about when you talk about one voice from the bottom to the top, and I think I get the sense often when I'm watching your stuff that you're trying to simplify some of this stuff, because I found that a lot of this terminology can, especially for hard cases and newbies, it can just they take something in and they interpret it in a way that is nothing like how it was meant, and they make all sorts of logical leaps in their mind, and and it just becomes this train crash. And I was one of those singers,
So was I.
and it's like, so now I kind of preach this. It's okay to have a little bit of terminology here and there, but ultimately we've got to get people making the right types of sounds and then them understanding how it feels. So I try and not to get people too attached to that. But but will you kind of go into some of your experiences with this? And because I know, like you said, you've been with lots of different methods and things, so you've probably got some sense of this as well.
Sure, but I would say that the methods that I was attracted to used pretty simple terminology. I was like I said, I'd studied with many courses and stuff. There was probably one that I didn't study with was CBT. It was just because the look of it just wasn't my thing. It just seemed a bit too, like, all the names and stuff. I'm just not into that. Like, I just wanted to hear somebody make a sound that was the right sound, and I'll just copy it. That's kind of that's why I like stuff like a James Lugo's course, because it's just pretty much, he doesn't even call anything. He just says, all right, so here's me, and he just demonstrates the sound. He goes, okay, you go up, you darken the sound a little bit, and you just copy it, and you just kind of figure it out. Now, it's not to say that it can always be that simple. Sometimes you gotta you may have more complex issues that you need to solve and stuff. But it was, for me, like Sing Success, Seth Riggs' course, Jamie Vendera's course, Ken's course, all those courses, they use pretty simple terminologies: chest voice, head voice, and most of them, when they refer to head voice, they're pretty much talking about falsetto. That was the biggest confusion for me, because there seems to be two definitions of head voice. There seems to be an old classical definition of head voice, which is kind of like what people are calling mix nowadays, which is, it's still your full voice, but it resonates in the head. But then there's another definition of head voice, which they're talking about kind of like a falsetto, but you're not being breathy on it. And that confused me a long time, because they'll be like, okay, you got to go to head voice. And I'll be like, does he mean falsetto without the breathiness, or does he mean like some other thing? And that confused me for a while. And then after a while, I figured out what they meant with that. But yeah, and mix voice didn't really confuse me, because I could hear what it was. I could hear it was pretty much full voice that doesn't sound shouted. It sounds relaxed, and it kind of thins out. I could hear it. I just physically couldn't make the sound. There's just nothing I could do to make the sound. I would get stuck at F4. After that was falsetto or head voice, and there was nothing in between that. And what confused me was the process to develop that. So, yeah. But as for terminology, I try to keep things pretty simple. I pretty much define it as chest voice, falsetto, and mix is pretty much the way I define mix now. I pretty much say, think of your full voice without strain, because it's really the strain that prevents it from mixing. If the chest voice is efficient, it doesn't have a wall. It just thins out it goes into your mix. It connects into that. But I really cater my terminology to my students individually. So some students may come to me with their terminology that they're used to, and I will ask them, I'll say, okay, what do you call this sound? I'll get them in a coordination. I'll say, what would you call that? And they go, oh, I'd call that my like a heavy mix. I go, okay. And we just use that then. We just use that as the terms in the lesson. That way, it's easier for them, because they don't have to change their ideas of anything. As for belting, belting's funny for me, because I see everybody defining it as something different than what I was always thought of it as. To me, belting is just pretty much intense singing. You're just really going for it, or with everything you got. It's very intense sound. But a lot of people define belting as pretty much like a yell, like a strain sound. To me, that's just straining, like you're just straining. So if you take out the strain, what is that sound? That's how I define a lot of the sounds. I say, okay, like they'll go, okay, well, you're pulling chest. Okay, well, you're straining in chest. Okay, what if you took out the strain? What would that sound like? And then they do a mixed voice note, and I go, there you go. So to me, a lot of things, if you take out the strain, it usually reveals what the sound is going to be. If you bring in the efficiency, it reveals what the sound's going to be. Yeah, I'm pretty simple with these terms, but I can get down and dirty with the stuff like chest voice, pharyngeal voice, twang, mix, heavy mix, light mix. I'm game with all that stuff. I don't mind people using that stuff. I usually know what they mean, but everybody does sometimes mean something a little bit different. So I like to just check with them. I just go, what do you mean by this? And then they say it, and I go, okay, cool. So that's usually how I roll.
Yeah,
I'm not down with the highway names. I'm not down with all the highway names that everyone's using now. Everyone's using like M1 and all this stuff. Those are names of highways where I come from. So that always was weird for me when people started first doing that a couple of years back. I was like M1. I'm like, what are you talking about highways for? I drive on that highway every day to work. So anyway.
Yeah.
I'm just joking to anybody using those words. It's all good.
With the falsetto and head, actually, that's an interesting one because you're totally right, and I think what's even increasingly made that more confusing is now more recently with Singing Success, they've rebranded falsetto and head as meaning different to what they use. Well, they've had the same definition that they've always had, but I just mean typically in Brett's definition of falsetto and head voice is going to be, at least in my understanding, is going to be falsetto is a lack of coordination. Basically, it's strain and the chords coming apart versus head voice, which is coordinated. But you are right. In classical, historically, head voice for a male was basically mix or full voice, however you want to describe it, and for a female, it was a coordinated falsetto, some people call it. So they were and for the same sound for a man would be a countertenor relative to what females, and they'd call that falsetto. So you'd have head voice and they'd have falsetto for a guy and head voice for a woman when the coordination was effectively the same, and it was just roughly speaking, but because they were different genders, they had different. It gets very confusing. But classical singing is historically just more gendered, I guess you'd say, than modern singing is, and so there's a lot of confusion there, and it's I'm like you now. Really, I'm just thinking, is it pushed? Is it strained, or is it coordinated and efficient? And if it's coordinated and efficient, it's not going to hurt you unless it's airy and that's all you're singing on all the time. But
sorry, go on. I was going to say something. Yeah, finish what you.
Yeah, and I do like what you talk about in terms of, if it's full out and it's loud and it's pushed, well, if you take the strain away, what's left? I think that's such a good distinction to make, because a lot of the time people feel like, oh, I can't do that because it pushes, but a lot of the time it's like, well, that's just because you're adding something that you don't need to add. You take the push away, take the strain away, the extra bits away, and you're left with a nice full sound. Whether or not they can do that is challenging to do, because if that's the habit, they always want to grab onto it, which is hard to let go of, because you're trying to let go of one thing whilst holding on to the correct thing. Challenge for people to do that. Sorry, what were you going to say?
I was going to say one thing that can be dangerous with a lot of vocal terminology, well, it's not to say that you should get rid of it all, but it's more that some people go too far with it in terms of, sometimes I'll get students and they'll be like, I've got to learn the mixed voice, and so I'll be teaching them stuff, and they'll be like, oh, when are we going to learn the mixed voice? I'm like, this is how you get it. This is how you get there. And I was like, but this is just chest voice stuff. I'm like, that's what it is. Like, it's not like a different like voice or anything, right? So they think it's some third voice or something, and I mean, some people may even feel it that way. I don't know. There might be some people that feel it that way. But I think it's dangerous to kind of go, okay, chest voice, head voice, all right, I'm going to go down here and go, and it's like, no, that's not how you go about it. So sometimes you get these clips on the internet of seeing people kind of doing that stuff. And yeah, I think people can get just lost in the sea of terminology. So I would say to anybody who feels confused, you just got to find a teacher that you resonate with, that understands this stuff, and just take lessons and get it sorted. Don't go getting lost and confused. I think you waste years.
Yeah, and I think one thing I found with struggling singers is often tend to be people that think a lot, and they think too much about tiny little minutiae, and they don't even have that much practical singing experience, and so they've set up this big web of thinking in their mind, and it's not attached to anything real and concrete. And like you say, when you actually just do it, it can teach you so much more in just an hour than spending hours and hours reading through like all these things. And I certainly felt that. One thing I also felt was just, I remember years ago feeling like you can have too much knowledge in a sense. I remember watching hours of Seth Riggs masterclasses and getting frustrated for months, feeling like, well, I know all this stuff in my mind, like I understand it now, so why can't I do it? Whereas, you can't go from just watching masterclasses to being a great singer. Like there's a big journey you have to go through to becoming skilled at what you do, and there's not really, there are things you can do to optimize that process, but you can't get around it. You can't leapfrog over the experience and the nurturing of that skill set. Let's go on to this. What have we got here? I wanted to just cover this. I've put here, how does a singer improve without hurting themselves? And I kind of brought this up in the idea of when we have these students, for example, or people who are reluctant to squeeze and compress and go through the range on a compressed sound, for various reasons they might be reluctant. Sometimes when they do start doing that, they will kind of squeeze in the wrong way here and there, and they'll feel some strain coming in, and so they back off. And I guess I want to know how you counteract that with students, and how you manage this sense of, well, when I do that, I push. When I do that, I strain, so I shouldn't do that. And like we were saying, well, what happens when you do that, but you learn to take the strain away? This type of issue, how, what are your thinkings on that? How do you get people around this idea of improving, pushing through their comfort zone just enough, this type of thing?
I usually, first of all, before let me preface this first about vocal damage. I've never understood the fear of damaging one's voice, just because my personality type. When I first started singing, I was in like thrash metal bands, and just I couldn't. I was just screaming my head out, like I didn't know what the hell I was doing, and sometimes I would cough up phlegm that had blood in it afterwards. My throat would be hoarse for like a week. I'm not recommending that to anybody, but I'm just saying, like, I didn't have a fear about it, and I never really had any issues. I mean, sure, it's not good for that to happen, but I've never gone to get scoped or anything like that. I can kind of just feel it. Like I just know, like, so if something happens, take a few days off, and if the voice feels better, then it's better. But as for so that's one thing. But as for, so I'm just kind of saying the voice is very resilient, and it's hard to damage it, and it can recover from a lot of things. But as for your question about how to get people to avoid straining and stuff, I usually find that people want to sing in a range that they can't control yet too much, and I was one of those people. So I thought, to get better at A4s, B4s, C5s, I've got to sing them a lot. Yes, if the voice is efficient. But if there's stuff going on down on the F4 that's wrong, then that's like that in your voice, and then you're just hitting the A4s and B4s and C5s with that thing in there, that tension or whatever it is. So the answer is actually to go back down to F4, fix it, and then go up there. So when I get a lot of singers that like doing wedding singers, cruise ship singers, and all that stuff, like touring singers, they can already kind of sing pretty high. They just don't know how to do it consistently. They don't know how to do it night after night. They kind of still getting hoarse and stuff. So they're like, well, how do I used to be able to hit these songs, and now I can't do it anymore. So usually I find, even though they can reach up to A4s, B4s, C5s and stuff, usually I find issues on C4, issues on D4, sometimes issues on A3. And I said, that's why you have trouble on this A4 or whatever, because they sing up and there's a bit of tension, but they can get through it. And I think that is one of the issues. It's usually the vowel is just off in some kind of way, and then as the vowel gets off in some kind of way, there's a just slightly, and it starts to lead to that as you incrementally go higher. The larynx starts to raise. So if it's just off slightly, it magnifies. It might be off this much here, but as you get up to the high range,
Yeah.
it becomes like that. And then suddenly it's make or break. It's like you're at your limit now. You've reached. So a lot of the times the vocal break is the culmination or the limit of issues that started like 5 notes earlier. The issues that start like this and then they become like that. So I usually say, okay, you may be able to hit a G4 or whatever. You may be able to yell it out, but really your comfortable range, I ask them to find their comfortable range that they can get through a whole song with that's relatively comfortable. You know, it might be up to C4, it might be up to E4 or whatever. And I have them work within that. And that's kind of what I do. And then we tweak the vowels usually. We tweak things. We tweak the way they open the jaw in certain ways that alters how the vowel will come out. And then that will start to help them find the right coordination for the next pitch. And then it kind of, so I find the voice unlocks in chunks or bridges, you know, like every kind of 3 or 4 notes, they'll get a chunk that they can control. And then once they get good at that, they'll probably get another 3 or 4 notes that they can control. But the short answer is find somebody who's got a really good damn ear that can hear when there's little problems that you can't hear, because usually you'll be singing something and you go, oh, but you know, I've got a wall at F4, I can't get past it. You know, I'm doing everything right. It's like, you're not doing everything right. There's something going on down there. Could be on the C4, could be on the E4. There's something going on. The vowel just maybe slightly off, and it magnifies. You know, I check this stuff on myself every day. I record songs, I listen back, and I go, the vowel's off of there. Fix the vowel. And as soon as I fix the vowel, and sometimes fixing the vowel doesn't just mean shaping the vowel and you know, shaping it. Sometimes it means you're not using the breath the right way. Sometimes it means the jaw's not opening enough. Sometimes it means the lips aren't shaping it right. You know, because that stuff will change how the vowel will come out, and then that will change how all of this sits freely or not. And that would change if you're resting on the note or if you're straining on the note. You know, the difference between and difference between those two things. The first one, I was resting a lot more. The second one, I was up there like that. And, you know, it's stiff. So a lot of things like that. The other thing I like to say is, can you fade in and out on the note? Because that will usually help you. You just will really struggle to do that unless your vowel is getting closer to the right mark, I guess. So, yeah.
Yeah. The way I totally resonate with what you're saying, and the way that I understand it is typically if there's a change in the basic shape of the sound, as long as it's staying narrow, versus when it gets wider, wider at the top, staying narrow. So I just generally think about it in those terms, where is it staying, the basic shape of the sound, is it staying the same? But it's essentially kind of a different way of explaining the same thing, really, in terms of the vowel just drifts and they start to, and that does magnify. Once you get wider, you can't get round it. You're just stuck in that wideness, and the only thing that's going to happen after that is going to get wider and wider. And I actually got a student that I'm working with at the minute who sings really well, but struggles just in the mid-range to stay narrow, just to stay on the same vowel. Or I guess the thing is with this idea of modification is, and we could maybe go into this a little bit, and I think people misunderstand me sometimes when I talk about keeping the vowel the same, because when I talk about keeping the vowel the same, I think other people are talking about modifying, and so we're talking about doing the same thing, but we're explaining it in a different way.
Yeah.
And so that's a terminology. That's a terminology problem.
That's why it's important for people, rather than jumping to the conclusions and attacking you or whatever, they got to ask you. They say, "What do you mean by this?" before they say what they're going to say. And, it's important. Yeah. And
anyway.
By the way,
go on.
By the way, I wanted to say, when you said narrowing, I think some people are going to get confused by what you just said. What I want to ask you right now, so if you sing a wider vowel, how would that work for you? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, well, my idea is this. So essentially, if I have the in here stays narrow, but this widens. Oh, 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 ah. So even though I open the mouth there, I still feel a certain narrowness in terms of the coordination in here. And the word narrow is quite subjective as well, in the sense of, well, what do you mean when you say narrow? I guess when I talk about that, it's a subjective term in the sense that I feel when I have this type of sound, versus I feel that the sound kind of gets directed into a more precise type of spot, if that makes sense. So it literally, in my mind, it feels like the sound is more focused and narrow. And when I feel it widening, the sound, in terms of the direction of the sound and where it hits, it feels squishier and more not as focused. And it's hard to explain, but that's how I feel it. So when I feel that precise focus in the sound, I feel like I'm narrow. And as long as I keep that focus, even when I articulate words, that focus is still there. And I talk about this concept of isolating the articulation from the coordination in here. And I guess I'm alluding to that, really, is that, you know, my goal is to really keep this stable and coordinated and just articulate the words. Now, it gets complicated because this obviously controls some of the darkness and the brightness of the sound as well, which is part of the vowel. So the vowel in itself is a product of the articulation and the height of the larynx, the brightness and the darkness. So it gets very complicated because you're talking about a lot of different things going on to produce the shape of a vowel. But underneath all that, I talk about the basics of the coordination when I talk about working on the horizontal in terms of how much compression how much are you compressing the vocal cords together, and pitch adjustment, and trying to get those two broad basic concepts separate to the articulation, because my view is basically that the articulation should work pretty naturally, just like as speech like as it can do, because when we look at great natural singers, that's how they articulate. They articulate in a loose, natural way. So I try not to get too convoluted with the articulation. That's what's worked for me anyway in my own singing. But I think that some of the time I struggle with, I give people such an end game type of explanation with some of these things, and that worked for me because when I started singing, all I was concerned about was the end result. And so all the pain I had to go through in the middle to get to that end result, I was happy to deal with. But I think that other singers aren't as serious as me. They haven't necessarily got as lofty goals and these types of things. And so for those types of singers, sometimes the information I'm giving out is just it's not necessarily going to help them, because some things are going to help them more in terms of getting a voice together more quickly. And I think sometimes that's probably my biggest struggle as a coach now, is balancing my goals in terms of end game singing for a student, what I envision, what they will sound like if they put in years of work and hours and hours and hours and hours, versus realistically, what they're going for, what are their goals, and trying to match my teaching approach with that and giving them what they want, rather than trying to guide everybody to this amazing end goal, Luther Vandross type singer, whoever it is, whoever you like, Michael Jackson, where it's like, realistically, how many singers are going to get to that point? Very few, because it's there's a reason there's very few great singers like that around. I guess I'm kind of going off a bit on a tangent there, but I just wanted to elaborate a little bit on some of my ideas, in the sense of, I do think sometimes that's my weakness, and I'm trying to kind of get to giving people useful advice based on what they want, rather than what I want for everybody, which isn't always realistic.
That's actually a really good topic that you brought up. Before we jump into that, could I just tie up all of that stuff about the narrowing and stuff? The reason why I brought it up was just because when you showed, like, you singing an ooh, and you said, I want to narrow it, I just could hear people on the internet going, but are you saying that you can't sing like wider vowels and stuff? So that's why I wanted you to show, okay, you're talking about something a little bit different than that. What you're saying is the way I translate what you say, because I have gone through a period where I use that term narrowing quite a bit, and I really dig what you're talking about with that. I always talk about like the vowels have to kind of go to a point. Even if it's a wider vowel, it still has to go to a point, and it has to rest. So a lot of that strain where it splats out wide, I know it can be a bit confusing. Oh, what's going on here? Sorry, something popped up there. I know some people can get confused, and they might think, like, how's these vowels going to work? So I kind of now have started to say, is the vowel rigid? Is it rigid? Do you have tension or not? Because if you think it's kind of wide, but it's not it's not that. That's rigid, right? So it's a difference between like the rigidity and freedom. And what I'm taking from this is that you're using this concept of getting the vowels to inside here. You're feeling that narrowness, and that helps you overcome rigidity and find more freedom. So that's kind of why I wanted you to clarify on that, so that anybody who was out there who had questions, they could have, But I like this topic that you just jumped on here.
We'll go to that in a sec, but actually, yeah, and the irony is of some of this is that I actually advocate, probably more so than most coaches out there, for singing very wide if you do it the right way. Singers like Whitney Houston when she was in her prime, Adele does this very well. Some singers do it really well, where it sounds like you say, it's wide and open, but it doesn't sound strident and kind of like there's no overtones in the sound, which is a bad yell. But the right type of healthy yell, you can actually do wide if you understand what you're talking about there, and you can apply it when you say the vowel should all come to a point. That's really the same thing I'm trying to get across to people. If you can do that and you can articulate wide open, then it's going to be healthy for you. But if when you open that mouth up, you lose that point to the vowel, and you lose the narrowness, that's when it goes towards the unhealthy type of yell. So we're really on very common ground there, and again, it's just the way we're explaining it is slightly different, but we're ultimately talking about the same thing. Sorry, what were you going to say?
I liked what you said about you said something about juggling the need to teach what the singer has come to you and they want to learn versus what you they need to learn, and the struggle between that. Because I think a lot of teachers go through this process where they're like, okay, this singer's like, I want to learn this, and the teacher's like, you don't need that, you actually need this. And is that kind of what you were referring to?
Yeah, some and this idea of having a vision for every singer of this end game of being amazingly good at what they do, and that's for most singers that's not going to be where they end up. They're going to end up as maybe good singers, but they're not going to necessarily have the time or the need or the want to become. And so the advice you're going to give them is going to be tailored towards that. At least that's what I'm trying to think about now, rather than always tailored towards an end game.
Interesting. Okay. The way I sort of see it now, this is I'll show you my process. What I do when somebody books a lesson with me, they get an email from me where I ask them the kind of their struggles, their obstacles, what they think is really frustrating them about their voice, and what they would want to get out of training with me, what they hope that I would teach them, what they hope they learn. So I get to understand what they think the problem is and what they think they want out of this. Then I use that as kind of like, in the back of my mind, I got that. But in the lesson, whatever I hear is the problem that's stopping them from finding freedom and consistency, those are pretty much my two main things with people. If they can't find a freedom and consistency, that is what I target 100%. And I just go that direction. So some people, they'll be like, some people, for them to find more freedom and consistency, their vowels have to be different than what they thought they had to be. So they'll be like, oh, but this doesn't fit with this style or whatever. And I say, I don't care about that right now, because this is what you got to do if you want freedom and consistency. Deal with that later. Get it working right. Because if you go that direction, you're going to just tangle yourself up more. So I come from it in that angle, and then as the lessons, as I guess it just kind of evolves itself. That's kind of my approach to that.
Mm.
But I like that topic that you brought up. I think that's very, very important because
Well,
some singers they'll come and they'll say like, some singers they'll go like, I want to build this. They have all these preconceived ideas of what it takes to get somewhere, and they'll say like, I want to sing really high but with no volume. I don't want to sound loud. I don't want to. So they have all these they're imposing all these limitations. I don't want to go louder. And so the volume you're at now is not loud enough. You have to go a little bit louder. I don't want to get louder. It's like you are not going to get there that way. So I don't care what they're saying when they come to me like that. I say, do it this way, and it's heading in the right way. It's just the reason why they're resistant is because they just don't know that is how you actually get there. So sometimes you get people, they just got these preconceived ideas. Like sometimes they will think, you have them do something light and they'll be like, oh, this is really light, or it's this falsetto. How's this going to help? Is this a falsetto? How's that going to help? And he's like, it does, right? So like today, I just had somebody work a lot on his falsetto because it helped him use the template to find the right vowel shade, and then we could crescendo that into full voice. And at first, some people who are used to singing very loud may find like, this is falsetto, how's this going to help me? You're running up scales and stuff. But if the teacher knows what they're doing, then sometimes what you need is not what you wanted initially, but it becomes what you want once you feel it. When you go, oh, now I can do the things I wanted to do. I just didn't know I was going to get there by this route.
yeah. Well, you can with. That's actually a good example with the people that are used to singing loud, pulling them back. Because what I found is if you take the weight off the voice, typically people have an easier time focusing the vowel or staying narrow, and they have an easier time getting through the bridge without it widening. And so what I found is with employing that strategy, you can show them just in a very simple way what it feels like to get through the range in the right shape, quote unquote. And then when they add weight, like you say, they've got a template or a direction to go now. Whereas before they do that, they're just always going wide, always going wide. So that's actually a good example of application in terms of, like you say, a student having expectations, and then you showing them actually to get there, you've got to go here and then underneath, and then you get there. So in terms of what I was talking about before with expectations and where a student wants to get to, this type of thing. Even so, when we were talking about this idea of singing wide but keeping the vowel focus, staying narrow, even that type of conversation for a learning singer, they can listen to that and they can try and use that information. But really, for a lot of those learners, as soon as they open the mouth up, they're going to yell. And so before you can get to that point, which is really that's more high level stuff, really talking about staying narrow and widening the mouth and worrying about all this articulation stuff. A lot of the time for a struggling singer, that stuff is too high level for them. They actually just need to learn to stay narrow through the bridge, just on something, learn to stay focused through the range, so that they're not doing that, which is often what happens naturally, as in that's just the tendency. And so I found that understanding what is going to help that student versus all of the information they're listening to, it can be very focused, and it's not necessarily, like you say, it's not always what they think. And balancing that with, like you say, the goals that they've given you is tricky. And also, obviously, people are paying money per hour, so you've got that to take into account. People, obviously, when they're paying, they rightly want results. And you've got a short amount of time to get them to the next step, this type of thing. It's one of these kind of just some of the trickiest problems really for a coach to solve, I feel like, is getting a student to take that next step in an hour, because you've got to, in a very short amount of time, you've got to assess where they're at, what is the next step for them. Then you've got to have practical application that's going to demonstrate that for them, and give them something to work on. And sometimes that can be quite abstract work. Like I've had singers who are very good, just work in the mid range, just on really speaking volume sounds, where they're just trying to keep the same shape, not let it not let it widen. And it's kind of tedious work. It's not necessarily glamorous, or it's like it's just motor skills at that point, and you're trying to get the motor skills to improve and get better. And balancing that, like the kind of dry, abstract, mechanical part of voice coaching with, the excitement we hear when we see singers and perform live, and it's amazing. Like, those two things can feel like oil and water at sometimes if a singer's not educated, and that they're really more towards the start of their journey, and they don't understand some of these processes that singers have to go through. I guess I'm kind of just alluding to this strange balance that we have to find as coaches, and just singers in general have to find between this kind of dry, logical, methodical process that singing can be in terms of practice, and the artistic side that typically people are more drawn to. Did you see what I'm getting at?
For me, the way I teach in a lesson, I'm very right-brain thinker, so I'm not. I like to just do things through sound. So I usually just here's the main thing that people, when they take a lesson, this is what I notice, is that outside of the lesson, they will tend to revert because they don't know how to get back into the same sounds that they were doing in the lesson. So the way I teach is I try to pretty much get them as familiar as they can with the sound. It doesn't matter if we're not going very high or whatever. I just get them into the sound wherever they can, where things are free, things are easy. We don't really have names for it or terms. It's just your voice is just working free and efficiently right now. And sometimes it's just one vowel. It's just one vowel, and you go, okay, just this is how you get into that vowel, and then we just go over and over and over and over again, and I just see if they can get into that sound, into that sound, into that sound, and then they just sort of fall into a rhythm, into a groove through the lesson, and then we get to a point where it's like, all right, now let's try it on the song. So it always has a context of a song. We start maybe with the song phrase at the start. I say, can you just sing me something? And then we sing something. I'll go, oh, I can hear a problem here. All right. We take that note wherever it may be, and then we just isolate the vowel, figure out the vowel. If they can't get the vowel, I take them to a different vowel that leads into that vowel that helps them get into that. We work that until they can get it, and we go a little bit higher, a little bit higher. And then when we try a few times, go a little bit higher. If it doesn't work, we come back down because they're not ready for that yet. And I don't know, for me, I enjoy that kind of stuff, that kind of, it doesn't seem that distant to me. Yeah. But the way I personally practice is a little bit different. The way I personally practice is pretty much through recording songs. So because that is kind of when we talked about the breakthroughs, when I felt I had the most breakthroughs in my vocals was when I was recording songs in those 7-hour days. Those days were just me trying to lay down vocals for songs. And I would just fall into a groove. You try one take, you mess it up. You try to get to the high note, you mess it up. And you go, oh, so you sing that whole line again that leads up to it. You mess it up again. You sing that whole line. And what you start to learn is that the lines, that the vowels and everything, the notes that precede that high note are the important part, because that's where you got to put all the tweaks to how you pace yourself to that high note. Because if there's any, you may be able to squeak out a high note, but if there's anything wrong in the lines that lead up to it, you choke right before you get to that high note. So a lot of the work is on those preceding lines, the way you shape your vowels that lead up to it. So some of it's so subtle that I may not even necessarily hear it. I will just feel it when the singer doesn't get it, and I was like, you didn't do that, and I'll change it and I'll tweak it for them. So I think a teacher has to not just have an ear, but they have to have that kind of bodily feel. They have to kind of feel it. I think, they've got to feel when something's wrong. Sometimes you won't even hear it. You just kind of feel, that's not right. And you tweak it, and then it works. So, that's kind of my angle on.
I like. I know what you mean. I spent quite a lot of time recording EPs and things like that. Probably I guess it was been about 3 or 4 years where I was probably doing like a couple of EPs every year. So I'd go through a period of like a month or so where I was doing a lot of recording, and I used to just comp everything. So yeah, I'd do like a phrase, rewind, do it again, once that phrase, and I would just do that. And over the years, as I got better, I would, I'd end up doing bigger chunks, like, I did a whole verse.
Yeah.
And then I did a whole verse and a chorus, and eventually just do, now I'm up to the point where I can do, just do like a couple of hours show, and I'm relatively confident it's going to go pretty well. But it wasn't, I was at the point when I did my first EP where literally I could do like a string of 3 or 4 words, and I'd have to do that like 5 or 10 times, and then I'd have to move on. And it was like that. It was like baby steps.
I went through that. Yeah, I went through that too. But like today my training was that though. Like today I was just working on the song, and that's all I did. I just record myself, and then the beauty of doing that is that you hear back what really happened, not what you thought what happened, but what really actually happened. And you'll hear stuff, you're like, I could have sworn that vowel was not that, and you're hitting the vowel wrong, and it's like, that's, I didn't do that. It's like, yeah, you did. You delete it, you try it again, you tweak it, and then you start to find more efficiency in your voice. And as a teacher, it upgrades your ear so that when you get a student, you actually start to hear more things that you couldn't have heard before. And you start to hear more nuances in the vowels and things like that are stopping them from getting there. Yeah.
I wanted to I kind of wanted to bring this round, really, I guess, and just ask you about any closing thoughts you have and things like that. And we'll put your YouTube channel and your contact details or something into maybe your website into the description of the video, so people have got that. But have you got anything you want to kind of finish up on, or kind of just?
I would say a piece of advice that I wish is very simple piece of advice, but I wish I had taken it to heart much earlier as a singer, was to, if you're struggling with your voice or you just want to learn how to sing, and obviously go like teacher and stuff, of that, focus singing within your comfortable range, because I think that puts you on a good track. So,
sorry, Phil. Will you just repeat that? Because I remembered what I was going to say to you, and I've typed it in so I don't forget. But could you just start from one piece of advice? Because I'm basically my keyboard cut out what you were saying.
All right. Got a keyboard. What kind of keyboard is that?
It's a mechanical one. It's really loud.
All right. Well, I would say a piece of advice that I wish I had taken on more seriously earlier on was to, if you want more range and you just don't have enough of it, and one thing that you can just do right now is to only sing songs within your comfortable range, because there are a lot of issues that arise when you try to tackle songs outside of your comfortable range. What will start to happen is that's when you start to pull your vowels out wide, do all these weird kind of things, strain. And when I say pull vowels out wide, I just mean straining. I don't mean that vowels can't be wide. It's just that if they're not supposed to be that wide, they shouldn't be that wide. Anyway, so just, you develop bad habits, you do silly things, and then you start going on the internet looking for all these kind of harebrained ideas and stuff. It'll be better just to build up a catalog of songs that you can sing from start to finish in one take with ease in your comfortable range. That way you're building up a catalog of songs so that if you run into somebody and they say, sing something for me, you can actually sing something, rather than training all this stuff, like you're training for these difficult songs, but really you're not learning anything easy along the way, and for years you've got nothing to show for it until you finally do get there. That's kind of pretty much how I did it, which is not the way I'd recommend it. The stuff I wanted to sing was so difficult and it took so long to get there that along the way I had nothing to show for it. So you want to have stuff to show for it as soon as you can. Just learn easy stuff. It will build your skills, and some people figure it out just by doing that. So you may be one of those lucky people to just do. A big breakthrough for me was warming up. And when I mean warming up, I mean long warm-ups. Like, you sing, say, 10, 15 minutes, walk away, 10 minutes, come back, sing a bit more. Usually it's better. You come back again, 10 minutes later, it's better. And if you do sessions like that, usually you can kind of get into a flow and things get to better, and you find your high range starts to open up easier and things start to get easier. That's kind of how I approach things. So yeah, I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, man, that's sweet. And I wanted to just refer back to what you were saying before. I think that voice coaching and singing in general is this interesting mixture between the intuitive part of your mind and the logical part of your mind. And I guess I was partly referring to that, but I think when I was talking about, you know, these types of dilemmas that coaches face, but I think the one reason singing is so good for people is because it really, and I liked what you said about when you were listening back to yourself, or when singers listen back to themselves, it kind of, you hear what you actually did. And I think singing can anchor you some in reality in that sense, in that, and I kind of getting deep. But
that was philosophical. You just throwing some philosophic bombs out here. That was good. I like that. That was good.
Yeah. Well, I think
it can
I think it can help people balance their personality almost in that way, because I was like, all I cared about when I started, like, very like logical, process driven type person, and I've had to really like nurture the intuitive, emotional side of my mind quite a lot to become a better singer. Just going back to, I wanted to refer back to one thing you were saying as well about singers who, this goes just to what you were saying there, singers that sing too far beyond their comfort zone too often when they're learning, and they set up a lot of problems for themselves. The converse of that, just to let learning singers know, is singers who sing, you know, everything is super safe and they never, you know, go beyond a certain range, and they're totally comfortable there and they never go outside that comfort zone. Those are the two extremes, really. Ideally, we want to be
that's a good point.
Yeah, roughly we want to be somewhere in the middle. Is in my experience, we want to be someone that knows that they can sing within their comfort zone when they perform, but then in practice, nudging their comfort zone, which requires, like, it does require going through some pain each time, because you know, it's not nice. It's not nice for most people, like, struggling, and that's, you know, to improve as a singer, you've got to face some kind of struggle. But I liked what you said, because that mirrors my experience when I started. You know, I was this skilled, and I was trying to sing songs by very, very skilled singers, and so I was just always so far out of my comfort zone, building no confidence in what I was doing, and feeling miserable all about it. And if I'd have just, you know, I could have actually enjoyed the learning process a lot more if I followed that advice you just gave people. Just, you know, find some things you can sing well. And for some singers, especially, you know, some guys who aren't, you know, naturally high singers necessarily, you know, that might be Johnny Cash, or it might be, you know, another singer who doesn't necessarily sing that high. But you know, that's a starting point. And if you can get a whole song together that people want to listen to, that is key. And I tell you, probably definitely in the last year, my focus has just been, do people want to listen to this or not, a lot more than anything else. And the answer a lot of the time, even when you're good at this stuff, can be no. People don't want to listen to that because there's just something off with it. It's not quite right. And a lot of Brett speaks about this idea of, you know, and you know, when you're saying it's either right or it's right, as in, if it's not quite there, it's pretty much as useful as it being a million miles away a lot of the time. Like, it's got to be spot on, because, you know, when people listen to singers and they get sucked in, it's just like when we talk and you get sucked in that, you know, you don't get distracted by the mechanics. That's really, like, what great technique gives you, is it gives you the ability to, for people, they don't hear the mechanics anymore. They just hear the communication. And bad singers, you hear the mechanics all the time working. I try and encourage people to think about it in that sense, is you've got to get the mechanics out the way so that you don't have to think about them and you can just communicate with people. I don't know, it's a key thing for people, for me personally, and just generally for singers, I think, especially people who are very technically minded and they want to sing high and they want to sing powerfully, and they just go too far. They're always just yelling and too far out of what they can actually do. and nobody wants to hear it, even if they think it's technically well executed. It is not, it's not the same as a professional, which is what everybody listens to all day long. In terms of the singers that everyone likes, they're all great and they're all really good. They aren't yellers. I don't know. I'm just kind of finishing up anyway with that. This has been great, Phil. I really appreciate you doing this, because
Cheers, man.
I wanted to. The whole idea of this is to start start fresh this year and towards the end of last year as well, and start building some positive relationships with coaches and stuff, and coming at this with a clean slate, so to speak. So yeah, this has been really good, man.
My pleasure, my friend.
And we'll put your contact details underneath this, and I guess maybe we'll do this again, maybe in 6 months or a year or something, and we'll catch up, man.
We can do that for sure.
Yeah.
So yeah, my website is Moufarrege.com. Yeah. So
Sweet.
Who's going to do the outro for the video?
I'll just fade it out, like now, whenever really. There doesn't need to be an outro.
Thanks for watching, everybody, and you got to finish my line off. Thanks for watching, everybody. Take care. See you soon.
Cool, man. See you guys. Yeah, I'll be doing some other stuff later on this week, and I've got Mark Baxter as well coming up, so look forward to that.
Oh, cool.
And,